Hi, you're listening to Sustainably Geeky, episode 86. I'm Jennifer, your host, and as a reminder, you can support the show on buymeacoffee.com/sustainablygeeky, and don't forget to subscribe and rate us wherever you listen to podcasts. Today, I am excited to be talking about solar with Owen Barrett, the founder of Shine, a company revolutionizing how multifamily properties generate revenue through solar installation. So, Owen, welcome to the show. And can you just start by, talking about your background and how you came to work in this sector?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I started off in finance and, I really enjoyed financial analysis. I just didn't love the finance industry. So I went to grad school for environmental science, and that launched me into a career as a corporate energy manager for a Fortune 100 company. So basically, it was my job to save our organization money by saving energy and got great experience with a bunch of different clean technologies. I quit that job in 2015 to start my own company called Lumio, which was a niche ESCO, so an energy services company. um, and we were working with rural schools and school districts in California, ended up working with about 40 of them in 18 months. I sold that company, started investing passively into multifamily syndications, so just buying apartment buildings with groups of people, and noticed really quickly that the multifamily industry is pretty far behind when it comes to energy management and on-site renewable energy. And so that was in, I think, 2017, and then since then, really, so for the last 8 years, I've been just focused on helping the multifamily industry decarbonize with on-site solar.
I do want to talk more about what you do with Shine, but first, I think it's important that we just give a few of the basics about solar itself. So, can you give us just a brief overview of talking about the history of solar energy and how it has evolved over the years?
Yeah, I think the big thing for people to recognize is the cost of solar has dropped, I think, 90% in the last 20 years. And that's really important because the price decrease has been sort of asymptotic. So oftentimes from customers, we'll hear that, that they're going to wait for the price to decrease further. That's not really like what's going on in the industry. You do see some decreases in price. Tariffs now are kind of offsetting that, but prices generally have stabilized. So the best time to install solar is now. It's not to wait for and hope that prices are suddenly going to decrease another 90%. I think the other really important thing for people to understand is that solar, the value of solar varies wildly across the country, not only depending on the state that you're in, but depending that you're on the utility that you're in. So like even like states in like California, which have some of the highest costs of electricity in the nation, that's really isolated to what's called the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities. Outside of those IOUs, you have like municipal utility districts, and the cost of electricity is a lot cheaper than it is in the IOUs. So you really have to understand like what's your cost of electricity in the utility that your home or your business is in. Um, and then just coming up with a plan to adopt solar sooner than later because the technology is not really improving that quickly. We're seeing like marginal improvements in technology, and we're seeing marginal decreases in prices. So the opportunity cost of waiting to install solar are a lot greater than seeing what's going to happen in the future in terms of price decreases or technology increases. So um, yeah, the time is now.
So is the reason that the price dropped so drastically because of those technology advances and it's kind of just plateaued now? It can't really go any farther at this point. Is that correct or
I think the way that I think about it is solar technology has sort of hit scale. And so you see like we're
Mhm.
seeing the same thing happen in storage right now, which is at a much earlier life cycle. The price decreases that you're seeing in solar or in storage year to year are substantial. And that's because the technology is not at scale yet. Solar has been around for a long time. We've had the tax credit for a long time to help with adoption. Um, and while the penetration remains like fairly low, I think on a residential basis, only 3% of US homes have solar. For multifamily, it's close to zero.
Mm.
So the adoption is not that wide, but the technology has been around long enough and it's been deployed enough that the biggest part of sort of the price decrease curve has already happened.
Okay. So for people who might be interested in looking into solar, can you walk us through that process of putting solar panels on a home or business? I know you work more with the multifamily, but just for anybody out there. And then, yeah, just like I guess what they should be looking for or alarm bells that they should stay away from, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, the bad news here is the solar industry is kind of the Wild West. There's a lot of bad actors in the industry, and so I think the most important thing is to get multiple bids. You want to get multiple bids because you want to just evaluate contractor to contractor, make sure that you're getting a fair price. I think the other big gotcha is if you do want to do some type of financing, whether it's like a third party owned, where somebody else owns your system, you're getting some of the benefits, or if it's some kind of solar loan, you really want to make sure that you understand um, the fine print in that financing agreement, because the financing agreements are what have given solar a really bad name. People get stuck into these 25-year agreements they can't get out of. They can't sell their house without prepaying the agreement. And so it's not only the contractor and the price of the system, but if you're financing it, it's understanding, all of the details of that financial contract, which are often pretty long and pretty complex. Um, so solar itself is a great technology. It provides a ton of energy savings to homes and businesses, but how you get there is not the easiest process. Um, and unfortunately, there's just a lot of bad actors in the industry that make it kind of hard for homeowners and businesses to adopt.
Are there any certifications or regulations people can look out for to kind of have that peace of mind, like you said, to kind of know that they're
I
legit?
mean, I think like better bureau business ratings is a thing. Um, I mean, word of mouth is great. Like word of mouth for negative experiences tends to travel a lot more than it does for positive. So I think if you can find a positive referral through like friends or coworkers, I would start there, and even if you can, even if you find a slightly cheaper quote, but you don't necessarily have a referral to that contractor, it's probably going to save you some headaches to go with the one that you do have a referral from.
Yeah, sometimes the cheapest isn't always the best. You get what you
It's
pay
never
for.
the best. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's almost never the best.
in most things in life, yeah. Okay, so let's say someone gets solar or is about to install this. How long can they expect the panels to last? And then what happens to those panels at the end of their life? I know there's been some work in kind of repurposing or recycling them, but where are we at with that technology?
Yeah, so the useful life for solar is generally considered to be 25 years. Most what's called a tier one solar module will have a production warranty for 25 years, meaning that at year 25, it should produce about 90% of the energy that it produced at day one. So it does start to lose some efficacy over time, but it's not that substantial. Um, so people should think about these things as a long-term investment. That doesn't mean that suddenly at year 25 it stops producing energy. Just means that the production is no longer warranted. Um, End of life is an interesting conversation. There are a lot of solar recycling. Well, there's a few solar recycling plants currently. There's a lot that are sort of trying to come online because people do see this as a big problem. 25 years from now, we have this just glut of old solar panels. What do we do with them? So I do think there's a lot of potential in the recycling industry. I don't think it's quite there yet, but the good news is we're just at the very beginning of this adoption of solar technology, and so we do have a decent amount of time to really figure out the best way to recycle the glass and the steel and the silicon from the modules themselves.
Okay, well that's good news because I think a lot of people are often hesitant for that reason because they don't want to produce more waste if they're environmentally minded, obviously. So, um,
I think that just on that note, I mean, there's been what's called a lot of life cycle assessments LCA has done on solar that take into
mhm,
consideration, the mining of raw materials and the disposition of the materials themselves. And even when you factor in no recycling, the LCA for solar still outweighs fossil fuel generation. So
mm.
yeah, it's like most things, it's not a perfect solution. It still has its issues, but I take issue with supposed environmentalists that say, well, the recycling industry really isn't as perfect as it needs to be, so therefore I'm not going to install solar and I'm going to continue to take my electrons from a dirty grid. Um, like we have to focus on incremental progress. If we just focus on perfect solutions, then we're never going to get anything done.
Yeah, I think every energy source has its drawbacks and pros and cons and everything. So, okay, so a lot of times when we talk about solar being used as an energy source, it's for individual homes or businesses. And you mentioned that you noticed an opportunity in multifamily housing. So, can you talk about specifically why that area is such an opportunity? What are the challenges in adding to these platforms where people usually rent, probably? And then how did your company manage to address those challenges?
So the big problem in multifamily is that 95% of the electric consumption of a multifamily property comes from the tenants. So owners are responsible for what's called a house meter or a common area meter that may, be for the exterior lighting and the hallways. If those are conditioned, those all fall in the house meters. But those are only 5% of total consumption for a multifamily property. So if you want to decarbonize multifamily, you have to figure out how to get solar to the tenants. And the challenge with that is outside of a handful of states, which are California, Massachusetts, and Colorado, if you want to install solar on tenant meters, you have to build and install one small solar system per apartment unit. So a 200 unit apartment building gets 200 small solar systems, and each one is interconnected directly into the apartment unit. And then post installation, you need a way to now bill 200 tenants and monitor 200 small solar systems. So it's really a software problem. And there was no software that solved that problem. So we knew how to do the installation, but we could not figure out how to build the tenants and how to monitor all of these systems. And so we spent all of 2023 building out a software platform to solve exactly that. And once we had that platform built, we basically unlocked an entire industry.
So this might be a dumb question, but why couldn't they just build one giant system and then, I don't know, track that way,
Ut-
or is that just not feasible?
Utilities, yeah, utilities don't let you.
Okay.
So that would have to be installed ahead of the meter, in front of the meter, and utilities
Mm,
require you to do behind the meter. And if you're doing behind the meter, then you have to be behind each individual tenant meter.
okay. Just seems like it'd be a lot less hassle for everyone and then rather than
Oh,
having 200
what?
systems.
Yeah, oh, yeah, it'd be amazing. I mean, from our perspective, it'd be incredible. And there are a couple states
Yeah.
that have that. California, Colorado, Massachusetts do have something called virtual net energy metering, where you do exactly
Mm,
that. You install one large system into the house meter, and then you virtually allocate the credits to the tenants.
mm,
But it has to be a program that's set up by the utility. And, by and far, utilities are taking sort of an anti-renewable stance. So they're
mhm.
generally not implementing programs that facilitate the installation of large scale renewables.
Okay, so like in the places that you've done this, is it up to the property manager, the apartment complex, whatever, or does the tenant have to make the decision and opt into it?
It's up to the owner to do it. Tenants usually do have to sign what's called an interconnection agreement. They cannot be forced to sign the interconnection agreement mid lease, but they can be forced to sign it at move in and renewal. And it does generate net savings to tenants. So interest should be aligned, although tenants are generally wary of what they see as fees. So there
Mm-hmm.
is an additional fee that tenants have to pay. For instance, if you're a tenant in an apartment pre-solar, you may pay your utility $100 per month. Post-solar, you're going to pay your utility $50 per month. So now you're saving $50. But of that $50 savings, you're going to pay the owner 45. So you're
Mm-hmm.
saving $5 per month. The owner's now making $45 per month, and the owner just justified spending $1 million to install solar on their apartment building. So it is truly win-win-win. But some tenants need a little bit more explanation just so they understand what's going on and what they're signing.
Mm-hmm. So let's say there are people that already live in an apartment or similar multifamily type situation. How could they encourage their property managers to consider something like this if they don't already have it?
I mean, I would love to give a more optimistic answer here, but unfortunately, tenants just don't have a lot of they don't have a lot of leverage in the multifamily space. I don't think it could hurt to ask property managers, but there's like a wall between property managers and ownership. So just because you
Hmm.
make the request to property management doesn't mean that it's going to make it to ownership. And if it does,
Mm,
is it going to land on the right person's desk? Um,
yeah.
I don't. That's not how we sell. We don't sell to tenants in hopes that they get the
Mhm.
message to the owner. We go right to the owner.
Okay. So one or two tenants coming to them might not make a difference, but if there was like a big movement, they might listen. Who knows?
And this might get more important, right? I mean, the most recent data that I heard is thanks to AI and data centers, residential electric rates are going to double by 2030.
Mm,
And if
yeah.
that really happens, then tenants will be demanding some sort of, well, maybe not necessarily will, but I think they'll be more likely to demand on-site renewables if it means it
Yeah.
takes that inflationary burden off of their electricity bill.
Yeah. We did an episode on that actually a few years ago about the uh, the burden of these data centers. I live in Ireland, and it's a huge issue. It's sucking away a lot of the renewables that we're implementing, and so it's kind of requiring them to bring on fossil fuels that when they're trying to decarbonize. So that's a really good point. Um,
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of forms of renewable energy have gained popularity as the technology's advanced and the cost has gone down, as we talked about earlier. And this is often in spite of fossil fuel industry's best efforts to lobby against these renewables, even in the face of climate change. So, can you talk about this growth in the renewable sector or solar in general, and why ultimately the market's going to favor renewables? I mean, I know we have this entrenched system already, but like regardless, I think we see the trajectory for renewables. So can you just, I guess, give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I like to paint a fairly optimistic picture when it comes to the deployment of renewables. Um, Trump and the Republicans did their best to sort of kneecap the industry through the big beautiful bill by getting rid of tax credits. Um, However, I think what they also did accidentally is create sort of the biggest tailwind for the industry that we've ever seen. And the logic for that is in 2024, FERC announced that of all new electric generation in the US, 90% was from renewables, so wind and solar. And then the big beautiful bill took away the tax credits for wind and solar, or they're phasing them out very quickly. And so that's effectively taking offline 90% of the generation of new electrons. Um, and at the same time, you have this the biggest demand growth of electricity that we've seen sort of in the last like 70 years from AI and data centers. So you have supply going down, you have demand going up. The only place that leads for prices to go is up, which makes renewables more attractive. So from a pure economic standpoint, the economic justification for renewables is going to greatly improve as we see sort of this supply demand situation play out over the next couple of years. But the other thing is just the pace at which you can get these systems online is so much faster than any alternative that, politics aside or belief in climate change aside, if you want to get a new power plant offline or online, it's, 18 months for solar and storage. It's 5+ years for natural gas. It's who knows how long for nuclear. Like, I'm a supporter of nuclear, but it's not a short-term solution. So I just think if you put all the facts on the table and you just make decisions based on economics and time, the only solution are renewables.
Yeah, they're just so much more scalable, and like you said, the cost just makes more sense. I think we're lucky. I say lucky in air quotes, but like we're trying to fight the battle for the environment, but it's actually good that it just makes economic sense. Like we're not having to convince people to do this just for the environment. We have another really legitimate reason, even if you don't care about the environment, like you were saying. And
I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, I'm a diehard environmentalist, but even I have a hard time doing things that don't make economic sense, right? Like,
mhm.
it's got to make economic sense to, especially to get the masses to move. So I think that's a big mistake that the industry has made, like our industry collectively. I think we've leaned too heavy on the environmental story and not enough on the financial story. I think we should have sort of flip-flopped the messaging, because I think a lot of people can resonate with wanting to save money or cheaper electricity bills, not having to go to the gas station, but instead we kind of harp on, we're destroying the planet and wildlife and biodiversity, which just turns a lot of people off, unfortunately.
Yeah, all absolutely important, very true points. But at the end of the day, people are going to think about their pocketbooks and can they pay the bills and feed the family and etc. So
Yeah,
we got to be realistic with it as well.
yeah,
And you mentioned the tax incentives being rolled back, and the ironic thing is a lot of the people that were being helped the most are the very people whose districts, like red districts, where
yeah,
um, they're the ones against it, but their constituents are benefiting. So it's just
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the midterms in the next election because if the messaging is done right, I think the Democrats have a good shot, but they often have a very hard time figuring out their messaging. So we'll see
Yeah.
how it plays out.
Yeah, we could do a whole other few podcasts on that. So, what do you see as the future of solar? You've worked in the industry for a while, and knowing that, like you said, it's probably not going to get much cheaper anytime soon, but there is an economic case for it. Where do you see solar going, expanding, staying the same?
I mean, I just see it. I see it rapidly. I see the adoption rate rapidly increasing again because of what we're about to see in the next, call it 2 to 5 years. People are cash strapped. They just like everyone, not everyone. A lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. People, on with some metrics, it looks like the economy's going well, but then on sort of the household metrics, things are kind of stagnant. People are feeling the pressure. So, if electricity rates really double or anywhere near that in the next 5 years, people are just going to get so frustrated and fed up with having to continually pay these higher electricity costs that they're going to have no option other than to turn to solar. Um, and then from a business standpoint, it's the same thing. It's like any increase in utilities is just increases in operating expenses, which just cuts into your profit margin. So um, I don't like rising electricity rates personally from how much I pay month to month. We just moved, so we don't have solar on our house yet. So I'm feeling the pain. Um, but I do like it from a business perspective. I mean, it's going to make our life selling solar much easier. And
Hmm.
it's just the unfortunate reality of sort of how the last, 18 months have played out.
Yeah. So like from an infrastructure standpoint purely, and I guess the electrons that come from the sun, could we power everything we need to power, let's say maybe not tomorrow but in the future, just with solar, or would it have to be a combination of solar and other renewables to really power everything? I guess, would the grid or the technology be able to handle it, or is there just not enough solar panels in the world to make that happen?
No, I mean, from an energy standpoint, more energy hits Earth, more solar radiation hits Earth in a single day than the entire planet needs over a year. So from an
Mm-hmm.
energy perspective, like yes,
It's
that's
just
not the
capturing it.
question. It's capturing it, it's storing it. The other thing is solar is not great at dealing with high peak loads,
Mm.
um, like quick changes in peak. So I I don't think, and I've never thought that we can decarbonize our entire grid. Now that was a sort of a pre-nuclear assumption. With nuclear, you might be able to, but you're always going to have these use cases where you have to fire on a peaker plant, or you just have to have batteries that can take the place of peaker plants. And I don't think the technology is quite there yet. So it's not really it's not an energy problem. It's more a technology problem.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this idea of completely decarbonizing like utilities or life as we know it is like just unrealistic altogether. I don't think that's what the industry is hoping for because I think that makes more enemies and makes our sort of mission harder. I think we need a more realistic approach of, um, replacing. carbon using technologies at the end of their life with zero carbon technologies, or bringing new power generation sites online that are zero carbon compared to a carbon equivalent. But this idea that we're going to flip the switch and just go to like a zero carbon economy all of a sudden is just not going to happen.
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen in the very near future, but hopefully we can transition and find cleaner energy sources over time, because regardless of, what people think about climate change, like fossil fuels are a non-renewable resource. We're going to run out someday, so we're going to have to
Yeah,
figure it out, and
yeah,
whether that's in 5 years or 500 years, but yeah, there's got to be better ways to fuel our lifestyles. So
yeah. No,
um,
yeah, I agree. It's a great point.
well, is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to throw in before we move
I
on?
think the question that we get a lot from customers is like, if this makes so much sense, why is nobody doing it? And it's a fair question, because when we put together our pro formas for customers and potential customers, the numbers are super compelling.
Mhm.
I think for our industry specifically, for multifamily real estate, it is a slow moving, not very innovative industry, and so it takes time to turn that momentum around, and you have to get these little wins. And I think this is sort of a metaphor for our industry at large. You got to focus on the early wins and the early case studies and the execution of the projects at the beginning if you want to change a whole industry, because like I said earlier, um, negative experiences tend to travel a lot further via word of mouth. So having these, bad contractors out there, or these shady salespeople that are just trying to make money and aren't really interested in the long-term effects on the clean tech industry, is
Mhm.
just a really good way to sort of get us all in trouble. So I think it's important to focus on execution, and just making sure that, like, recognizing that we're still in the very early days of this transition, and we
Mhm.
need to make sure that everybody has as positive an experience as possible with these projects, because we have to get that like word of mouth flywheel going.
Yeah. So having said that, how did you manage to get your, early adopters, I guess, to try this out, take a chance on it, since it is kind of, like they said, just
Yeah, no, it's
nobody's
yeah,
doing
it's,
it.
it's a great question. I mean, we went from our first customer in 2024 to 2025. We're working with two of the five largest multifamily owners in the US, publicly traded
Mm-hmm.
REITs. And it is hard to get them to believe in a new company. There's startup risk. They're very risk averse. So
Yeah.
I think the company Shine is new. It's been around since 2023, but myself and my co-founder, like, we've been deploying clean tech together since 2016, 2015 actually. So we have a
Hmm.
long successful history of doing these types of projects. Now it's just under a different umbrella. But I mean, that's one of the hardest things about starting a company,
Yeah.
especially if it's like a business to business type
Hmm.
business model. It's hard to get them to believe in a startup sometimes. And sometimes you have to offer price breaks or just like certain perks. But thankfully, I think we're sort of through that startup stretch. I hope,
Hmm.
because I think
Yeah.
life gets easier once you're beyond that.
Yeah, because that was kind of my first thought when I heard of the company. I thought, wow, this is really cool, but how are you convincing people to do it? Because it is kind of such a new concept, and like you said, companies tend to be risk averse. But having the experience and relationships from previous work probably made a big difference. So,
Yeah, and I think it's easier to sell something when you truly believe in it. Um,
mm,
One of my first jobs was a Cutco salesperson. The like door to door knives. I don't know if you're familiar with Cutco, but I had no interest in selling knives and scissors, and I was not a very good salesperson. But now, I
yeah,
mean, I've been an environmentalist before I had kids, and now I have
hmm,
kids, and I think it's even more important that I continue doing what I'm doing. Other people continue
yeah,
trying to help save the planet, and so, like, yeah, at the end of the day, we're selling projects, but we truly believe in the value that we're adding to these companies and the environmental benefit that we're bringing. And so I just think it's a more persuasive pitch, even though we are like new and there is some risk. There's some startup risk for sure.
Yeah. So, what advice would you offer someone that's maybe got a cool idea like yours that maybe seems a little out there or different, but they really want to give it a shot for the right reasons? Like, is there something you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I get a lot of like people from where I went to college and grad school reaching out for sort of entrepreneurial advice. I think the number one piece of advice is just focus on your customer. Like it's better to have one supportive customer than this like big, fancy deck and a lot of money behind you potentially, because once you have sold something to one customer, you know that you are, albeit it could be small, you're solving some kind of problem. And then you can learn from that customer about how you could have done things differently or better to get customer two, three, four. Usually the first customer is the
Hmm,
hardest. So I
yeah.
think just really paying attention to your customer, your potential customer, and kind of doing everything that you can to get that initial win, and then trying to leverage that
Hmm.
win into faster growth.
Yeah. So kind of partnering with them almost in a way when you're at the beginning stages.
Yeah, I mean, so like I fell into this trap myself, but just getting like obsessed with your Excel models and your pitch decks and your like meeting with investors and potential investors, and meanwhile you're not out there talking to your customers, so you don't really know what they want.
Mm,
And I get it, like you probably maybe you don't have to raise money, but it's sometimes it's easier to continue operating if you can raise money if you're not at revenue yet. So you're trying to balance all these different things, but like at the end of the day, the customer is the most important thing. And if you're not
hmm.
solving a problem for a customer, you probably don't have a very good business. So
Yeah.
just remembering that like you got to stay in tune with your customers and just
Yeah.
like let them tell you what their problems are and you try and figure out the solution, but don't come up with the problem solution yourself.
Mm, okay. Well, are there any resources you would share with our listeners about anything we've talked about?
We just built a really cool AI tool. It's on our website, getshine.com. So if you're a multifamily owner, you can now get pretty accurate cost and income numbers for a solar project on your property. So we're super excited about that. I think I've got a podcast with a good buddy called Let's Talk More Action, and we're just interviewing people that are doing big things in the sustainability space, and so that's fun too. We try and maintain like an optimistic tone because I think there's a lot of doom and gloom out there that just
Hmm.
kind of gets people down. So I think it's important that
Yeah.
we get people excited too. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think those two are a good starting point.
Okay. Perfect. Well, we will link to all that on our show notes as well for anyone that's interested. I guess now we will just move on to our green life hack portion of the show where we share one tip each on something that folks can do to live more sustainably. So, Owen, do you want to start us out?
Yeah, well, man, what will I focus on? I think a big one, especially just because of everything we talked about on the show, like with electric demand increasing and how are the utilities going to respond and what is it going to do to prices? Just like getting a smart thermostat makes
Mm,
such a huge change. And I mean, maybe it's not huge, but if every home and apartment were to have a smart thermostat and were to program it so that you're pre-cooling or preheating depending if you're on gas or electric, that would have a massive impact on peak demand. And so that's something that we've done recently, and it's small, it's fairly inexpensive, and on aggregate it could have a huge impact if more people adopted it and actually
okay.
used it, right? Just having a smart
Mm.
thermostat doesn't do anything. You have to actually use it.
Yeah, because a lot of folks probably just let the thermos or the AC or heater run nonstop, but you could actually program it to be on and off at certain hours when you're not there or in the
Mhm.
evening or whatever. So that's kind of what that would manage for you, I guess, right?
Yep.
Perfect. Well, my Green Life hack is I recently discovered a group on Facebook, which I try not to spend too much time on, but it's called the Non-Consumer Advocate Group. And basically, it's just people sharing tips on how they reduce waste, reuse things, make their own whatever. And it's just been interesting when, you're trying to do all those things yourself to see new perspectives and also see that other people are kind of doing the weird things you're doing and reusing jars and whatever. So
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend that group to anyone that's interested in learning more. Well, Owen, this has been a great conversation. One more time, do you want to share where folks can find you and or Shine online?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Owen Barrett, or it might be Owen Madsen Barrett. Getshine.com is our website, and Let's Talk More Action is a podcast.
Perfect. And you can find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky as well now. And as I said at the beginning, you can support us on buymeacoffee.com. You can also find me personally on Instagram and Blue Sky at Head's Gonna Be Me. For everyone listening, have a great rest of your day.